Okay, the final item of business this evening is a members' business debate on motion 14408 in the name of Tim Eagle on improving access to health and social care in rural Scotland. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I invite members wishing to participate in the debate to press the request to speak buttons, and I invite Tim Eagle to open the debate. Around 7 minutes. Mr Eagle.
Well, thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I remind the Chamber that my wife is a GP partner in a practice in Buckie, and that I previously served for 5 years as a councillor in Murray. Now, when I first came to this Parliament nearly a year ago now, the one thing that I really wanted to get across to address was the issue of rural depopulation. In my first members' business debate, I focused on that very issue. But in this debate, I want to focus on arguably one of the most fundamental issues that impacts rural depopulation, and that is access to healthcare. Following the debate into the Health Committee's inquiry on remote and rural healthcare, I raised some of the pressures that rural communities face. But I wanted to see more debate on such a big topic, and I wanted to give other members an opportunity to highlight their local issues and stories. I am grateful to everybody in the Chamber today. Now, I won't lie, there is an element of politics in this, as I fundamentally don't believe that the SNP government has served residents in rural Scotland. And this is not just my view. I have heard too many stories of appalling failures to deliver healthcare by the people I represent. A lady that slipped and fell was lying on her back for 8 hours waiting for a 20-minute ambulance. A man having a heart attack sitting outside a local district general hospital. Why it takes 5, 6, 7 years to reinstate maternity services. Cancer diagnosis which take longer in rural areas. These are appalling failures. And yet, as I know my colleagues will show, it goes on. Now, I think I can split this into two areas. Firstly, the kind of macro problems, the big issues that fundamentally lead to poor health outcomes in rural areas, the topics that will be discussed around the dinner table and much discussed in this chamber, whether that be rural transport, connectivity, roads, local provision of services, housing and employment. Then there are the smaller issues, the niche, technical issues that come with rural healthcare delivery. I asked a range of doctors across the North Eastern Highlands to tell me in their words what the issues are. And they said, smaller teams are less resilient, so a small reduction in staffing has a bigger impact, whether temporarily or in the long term. Less third sector community support than before. Significant recruitment challenges. One GP said, fundamentally, the role of a GP has changed over the years. Most GPs now work part-time, due in part to the workload, in part due to work-life balance. A higher headcount is required, and that in turn is harder to deliver in rural areas. GPs need a realistic funding model that can sustain smaller establishments. The current system just does not work. A lack of any real push on remote and rural training programmes, where early work at medical schools should encourage a specialism of rurality. Another doctor said larger hospitals would, of course, tend to have that responsive, dynamic learning environment because of the sheer size of them, which is not something that is easily delivered in smaller hospitals. The lack of specialist trainees rotating through smaller rural hospitals, which provide support to consultant and some foundation years doctors. Another doctor points out that where you might have a long-term generalist, amazing in their field, and you know that they might retire in a few years' time, there should be a mechanism by which we can bring people in, another doctor in earlier, to learn their core skills. Now, the Cabinet Secretary, I'm sure, is aware that at present we aren't delivering maternity, orthopaedics, even basic screenings in some areas. In my own region, we have got serious staff shortages in Elgin and Thurso, Campbelltown, Stornoway, Uist, and I could continue. General practice too has recruitment challenges, as we saw with the first group of ScotGem graduates. Out of 52 students that graduated, 2 have taken up posts in my region and 8 others have taken up other rural posts. Now, if I had longer, I could talk about social care, community nursing, mental health support, cancer diagnosis, vaccines, immunisations. We have unique challenges in rural Scotland, but we should never feel that we are being treated as second-class citizens. Absolutely.
Deputy First Minister.
In the spirit of commending some of the workers in rural areas, one of the advantages I have seen is in smaller teams being able to adapt and innovate and trial things more effectively. So I think of Ross Memorial in Dingwall, where they have been far more effective at reducing delayed discharge because they know the teams on the other side a lot better. So does the member agree with me that actually freeing up healthcare professionals to be empowered to take decisions on the ground is often more successful in rural areas?
I actually do agree with that. And and I don't come into it because I haven't got time in my speech, but that is one of the arguments I would make, is that some of the centralisations that we've done around CTAC nurses and mental health support hasn't worked, because actually local teams making decisions locally are better for it. Now, in regards to staff, the pressures we are being put under in rural Scotland too often now manifests itself in unfair treatment of staff, themselves part of our rural communities. It is never acceptable. But I do in part understand that patients are anxious, worried, in pain, and they are never getting appointments, perhaps being sent further away for treatments. But I do think we need to reflect that concern in this Parliament and through our NHS boards. It is not health professionals on the ground that should ever face the punishment for the lack of delivery by those who sit on the middle benches in here. So perhaps a small plea: rather than leaving behind frustration or anger next time you need healthcare, consider leaving a packet of biscuits or a cake, maybe even a thank you. What we need is bold, brave, common-sense policies that can deliver real, lasting change. If we want more doctors in our rural communities, we need to incentivise them to come. If we want rural healthcare to be strong and sustainable, then we need to accept the costs that come with that. And we need to provide working environments which offer educational opportunity, a work-life balance which is fair. We need to ensure that in 21st century Scotland, we are providing the services that people need. Other countries have been successful. In Estonia, the government has developed an AI-powered health information system. Brazil have taken on large volumes of community health workers. Chile has put in place a rural practitioner incentive programme, providing financial incentives, housing incentives and professional development opportunities. Australia have the Royal Flying Doctor Service. The four key themes that underpin these global approaches are decentralisation, the use of technology, the use of incentives and ensuring community involvement. We need a campaign that brings all of this together. We need a campaign that will continue to raise that awareness, that will bring people from across Scotland together to show with absolute clarity what is happening. That's why I'll start a rural awareness campaign for healthcare. But what I have said here tonight is no political trickery. This is a reality and it has to be fixed. Presiding Officer, we don't need more talk. We need positive action. Our communities feel the daily pain of a weakening health system. Our staff are too often exhausted. District General Services depleted. Health boards which seem to have adopted an attitude of, you come to us, we don't come to you. But one person in this chamber could change that. They could grab those four themes and go wild with common-sense, actionable policies, shake up the system, support our rural staff and provide the change that is needed. Because if he doesn't do that, the Cabinet Secretary, then I hope the people of Scotland will let the Scottish Conservatives do that in 16 months' time. Because rest assured, we would.
Thank you. Before we move to the open debate, I can advise the Chamber that we are heavily oversubscribed for this debate. It is inevitable we will have to extend by an additional half hour, but even then we may struggle to accommodate everybody. I'm keen to include everybody that wants to speak in the debate, but it may mean that later speeches have to be truncated somewhat. But I would ask that all members stick to their speaking allocations and do not go beyond it, because they will be cut off. I'm going to call first Fergus Ewing, to be followed by Finlay Carson. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Ewing.
Presiding Officer, in thanking Tim Eagle for, as he said, giving us all the opportunity to raise important matters, I wish to focus, as I've intimated to the Cabinet Secretary, on one, namely the forced removal of vaccination services from GPs in 2023. Presiding Officer, last spring, an infant in Highland died. No doubt the Fatal Accident Inquiry, as is appropriate, will investigate the circumstances in due course. The family seeks total privacy, and that must be respected. But it is the belief of GPs that have been consulting, informing, advising me, as the Cabinet Secretary knows, notably Dr Alistair Noble and Dr Adrian Baker, and more recently Dr Ross Jaffrey from Nairn and Bewley respectively, that this did arise because of the lack of access to vaccination following the loss of provision of that service by local GPs. Now, this change was brought in 23, and taking up the case, I challenged whether it should take place at all with Hamza Youssef, then Mike Matheson, with Neil Gray, with the current and previous First Minister in the Chamber, in letters repeatedly and in meetings. And what has happened is that the GP contract enforced the removal of this service from GPs, despite the fact that I think 3/4 of GPs in the Highland voted against the contract, and now 90% of GPs want it back. And I'm informed by Dr Jaffrey in a paper that he's provided recently, and I furnished a copy of the Cabinet Secretary, that the ones that don't, the 10%, are actually Highland Health Board, are largely a Highland Health Board practice, no doubt taking their lead from the NHS Highland. Now, there are many problems of this, and there is cost, because the old system cost £1.5 million roughly. It's believed the new system cost £6 million. Extrapolate that across the whole of rural Scotland, massive waste of money. But the cost isn't as important as the harm. I think we would all accept that. And one of the truly, utterly shocking facts about this is that the details of who has and has not received any immunisation, or whether it's flu, MMR, whooping cough, COVID, cannot be shared with GPs. So the immunisation is done at centres, centralised centres, and the GPs do not know when they see a patient whether or not the patient has been immunised, particularly children. That is leading, as Dr Jaffrey has pointed out in his recent paper, to a drop-off of the immunisation rates. He said that they used to do 60% in October, a surge to get herd community up. That's all gone now. The facts are there, Cabinet Secretary, in Ross Jaffrey's report. I can't go over them all, but the levels of immunisation in things like... yes?
Very briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
Very briefly. Obviously, I've met with Fergus Ewing and his GP colleagues, for whom I'm very grateful for their advice. He will, I hope, accept that I have also provided very clear guidance and authority to NHS Highland to use the flexibility that is contained within the 2018 contract to ensure that where general practice-led vaccination should take place to remove barriers to people getting access to vaccines, that they can do that and they should be doing that.
Fergus Ewing, and you will need to conclude.
Well, I appreciate the Minister's intentions are entirely honourable and good. I totally accept that. But can I just say to him gently, as a former Minister, good intentions aren't enough. I don't know why, if that's what the Cabinet Secretary says, NHS Highland hasn't restored the service to GPs. But I tell you this, and I don't ever wish to be alarmist about health issue, presiding officer, in 25 years. If action is taken soon, what will the Cabinet Secretary say if another infant's life is lost because they can't get access to life-saving vaccinations
Thank you.
for diseases
we now need to move on. Finlay Carson to be followed by Douglas Ross. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Firstly, I can congratulate Tim Eagle on bringing this crucial topic to the Chamber today. As we hear, living in rural Scotland remains a massive challenge these days, and one that is certainly not getting any easier thanks to the centralist approach being taken by the SNP government. Having been born, raised and thankfully still live in beautiful Galloway, I know the many benefits of residing within a rural community, not least the stunning scenery, the abundance of fresh air and, more importantly, being part of a strong bond that rural communities are. However, the pros are rapidly being overtaken by the cons, especially when it comes to accessing health and social care. For starters, resulting in people having to travel greater distance to access an ever-increasing range of services, often taken for granted by people living in towns and cities. Today, we are seriously struggling to recruit and retain staff across a wide spectrum of skills, from dentistry, midwifery, as well as nursing and social care staff, with a large number of vacancies going unfilled, placing an even greater strain on an already under-pressure NHS workforce. As we heard earlier today in another member's debate brought to the Chamber by Rhoda Grant, the Scottish Human Rights 2024 Highlands and Islands report highlighted the pervasive issues of rooflessness, hunger and limited access to healthcare. While the report's findings are specific to the Highlands and Islands, also deeply resonate with us in Galloway. And I'm delighted that the Commission will now look more closely at similar problems being experienced in my own constituency. Access to healthcare remains a significant challenge, where long wait times and limited availability of service are barriers to the care that residents need. This is not only a violation of their rights, but also a threat to their health and well-being. Like other rural and remote communities, there is a serious crisis within the midwifery section, particularly in Wigtonshire, something I've previously raised on countless occasions in this chamber. And according to two former GPs, Dr Gordon Baird and Dr Rod White, whom I'm indebted to for their forthright opinions and advice, the current maternity arrangements fall well below any minimum standard. A review was carried out by NHS Dumfries and Galloway's Integrated Joint Board to examine the present system that has failed women and families for the last 6 years, with many distressed stories of roadside deliveries and dashes to the maternity hospital in Dumfries. Women in labour are simply being told to bypass their local community hospital at their accident and emergency, and with no access to a local midwife out of hours, they are being forced to travel up to 90 miles along the A75. It should be pointed out that Stranraer is in many ways deprived, where 40% of people lack access to personal transport, never mind public transport. So you can add into the equation of getting to Dumfries, and that might involve a wait for an ambulance. So it's little wonder that Dr Baird and Dr White insist that without appropriate action, the system falls below any minimum standard, way below any minimum standard that could be regarded as fair or reasonable. They insist that the Integrated Joint Board process was not independent, and it's not independent in structure or its conclusions to the review. Data has often been ineptly handled to mislead politicians. Indeed, the board record and implementations of such reviews affecting Wigtonshire is dismal, to say the very least, including the future of our four cottage hospitals. As well as overruling mothers-to-be who wanted to see the reopening of the birthing suite at the Galloway Community Hospital, instead forcing them to make that journey to Dumfries, the IGB also ignored the findings of an independent review carried out by health experts in Ayrshire, who recommended that local maternity facilities be reopened. All of this flies in the face of the advice of Health Minister Jenny Minto, and indeed Marie, who attended Stranraer, and who wrote to me last October and stated, and I quote, "The Scottish Government expects all NHS boards to provide maternity services that are delivered as close to home as practicable, and to offer a full range of birth options within the region. That, in nobody's mind, is 90 miles close to home." Presiding Officer, in circumstances, once again, I could urge the Cabinet Secretary to consider an urgent review of this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Neither speech so far has remained within the 4 minutes. We will need to do better. Otherwise, people that do want to speak in the debate are going to be deprived of the opportunity. I call Douglas Ross to be followed by Rhoda Grant. Up to 4 minutes, Mr Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I congratulate Tim Eagle not just for securing tonight's debate, but the tour de force he gave for the issues affecting his constituents, our constituents in the Highlands and Islands, and people across rural Scotland. The issues I'm going to raise tonight will not be a surprise to the Cabinet Secretary. I've raised them many times in this chamber before. But I will keep coming here, keep raising these issues until we see improvements and change. The first is the Save Our Surgeries Burghead and Hopman group. Now, some of the campaigners were going to come down to Parliament to watch this debate when it was previously scheduled and had hoped to be here today, but because of illness they are not. But when I met with them on Monday, they wanted the Cabinet Secretary and his ministers to know that they are watching at home in Murray to hopefully hear a positive response. Because last month, when I raised their concerns and their proposals for a nurse-led unit in Burghead to replace the surgeries that they had lost, the GP surgeries in Burghead and Hopman, they had hoped to hear positive news, and they didn't. From Jenny Minto, they got a point-blank refusal. And I asked them for their words, because I don't want to make this a party political issue. And they said I could tell the Chamber that they were bitterly disappointed. They also said it's very frustrating, given the positive meeting that they had with Jenny Minto and I attended in Burghead in the summer. So I hope in the proposals from Save Our Surgeries, Burghead and Hopman, the Cabinet Secretary and his ministers will reconsider this plan, because without Scottish Government support it will go no further. But there is an opportunity to show this local group, campaigners dedicated to services in their area, that there is an opportunity to have a nurse-led service in Burghead. And the request I have, and I've written to the Cabinet Secretary about this, if the Scottish Government continue to say they will not support this, can they tell us the funding calculation they have made of this proposal, because without that, it seems like the local group are being fobbed off when there is a real opportunity to provide a local service. The other issue I want to raise is the ongoing lack of consultant-led maternity services at Dr Gray's. This has been ongoing since 2018, and I have mentioned it repeatedly in this chamber. I spoke to Marge and Kirsty Adams of the Keep Mum group ahead of this debate, and some of the points they wanted to get across I think are really important. They are both positive and some concerning. On a positive note, they said they are really encouraged by the system of consultation that's been held locally, and the local staff at Dr Gray's who are really pushing this forward. They're also positive, as am I, that elective caesareans could return to Dr Gray's soon. If we could get a date for that, that would be really welcome news in Murray. Where they are slightly more concerned is the Dr Gray's strategy planning paper that went to NHS Grampian Board on the 12th of December. And quite apart from anything else, it was quite a concerning report. What public consultation was there to hear from people in Murray, Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City throughout the NHS Grampian area, but particularly those in Murray who rely on Dr Gray's? Where was the public engagement? Because there certainly doesn't seem to have been much. And they also state that they have heard from several NHS staff that they fear the commitment at NHS Grampian Board level for the restoration of the consultant-led maternity unit at Dr Gray's Hospital is weak. And the reason we need this back again is because I've had an FOI response returned to me about the number of babies born to Murray parents that have been out with the area since 2018. So of over 5,500 babies born to Murray parents since 2018, just over 1,000 were born at Dr Gray's. Over 4,200 have been born in either Aberdeen or Inverness. They need to be born locally. We need that service back up and running because on top of that, almost 550 Murray mums have had to have a blue light ambulance transfer to give birth, including my own wife. It needs to get a lot better, and I hope the Cabinet Secretary will listen to these points and do that urgently. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I now call Rhoda Grant to be followed by Jamie Harker-Johnson. Again, up to 4 minutes.
And thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I also thank Tim Eagle for bringing forward this debate. Access to health and social care in the Highlands and Islands is poor, and it's borne out by the Scottish Human Rights Commission Spotlight report we debated earlier today. The availability of social care is declining. Since 2022, 218 social care beds have been lost in the Highland Council area alone, and the lack of social care is putting pressure on primary care, where people await discharge to suitable accommodation. The lack of suitable support or accommodation means people are trapped in hospital. Because of this, hospitals cannot admit others for their treatments, and that leads to lengthening waiting lists all over the place. Back in 2021, the Feely Review recommended a human rights-based approach where people are aware of and can advocate for their rights and can easily access and maintain the care they need. Well, that recommendation has not been met, and sadly, things have simply got worse. And this is even more distressing for those who are in their final days, time that should be spent at home, surrounded by loved ones, spent trapped in hospital. The Scottish Human Rights Commission recommends human rights-based budgeting that provides services that fit the need of people accessing them. The lack of access to gynaecological services and maternity care in rural areas is unacceptable.
Cabinet Secretary, briefly.
Yeah, on the social care point, very briefly, obviously the progress that we're seeking to make through the National Care Service is about enshrining a human rights-based approach on decision-making and budgeting. Will she agree that as we seek to bring matters back around the National Care Service, that we maintain that human rights-based approach to decision-making and budgeting at all levels on social care?
Rhoda Grant.
I agree that we need a human rights-based budgeting approach at all levels to meet people's human rights, and that was very clear from the Scottish Human Rights Commission report. I was turning to gynaecological services and maternity care in rural areas, and it's really unacceptable that mothers are travelling 100 miles while in the middle of labour giving birth, and that's surely not human rights based. And if you imagine that happening when roads are blocked, that is even worse. In the Highlands and Islands, we've also seen hospitals and services impacted by budget cuts. The Caithness Health Review on hold, the joint maternity redesign between NHS Highland and NHS Grampian on hold. We've had more positive news about the Belford, but this has only been given the go-ahead to the planning and design stage. The new hospital in Barra was completed to the planning and decide stage, and that was then unceremoniously dropped by the Scottish Government. So this provides cold comfort to the people of Lochaber in the context of the Belford, and they have to keep the pressure up for their hospital. For Barra, the Scottish Government must reinstate their commitment to the Castlebay campus and provide the people with the hospital that they need. I could cite many other issues, Presiding Officer. I know we are tight for time, but if I can just turn to the Government initiative ScotGem, which aims to boost rural GP numbers, yet it only delivered 2 trainee doctors in the Highlands since 2016. We know that allied health professionals are not available, so people can't access services that are no longer provided by GPs. So we need a review of the GP contract with our rural vision in mind, and I would urge the Scottish Government to do that as soon as possible.
Thank you, Ms Grant. I now call Jamie Halker-Johnson to be followed by Rachel Hamilton. Up to 4 minutes. Mr Halker-Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and others have done. Can I thank Tim Eagle for bringing this debate to the Chamber? And I think the number of speakers and the pressure highlights just how important it is to those of us who live in rural Scotland and, of course, on our islands, and how important it is to our constituents and our communities. I have a number of areas I'd have liked to have covered today, and I'm very conscious of time, so I won't be able to go into the detail on all of them, but I hope to cover some key areas of concern. And as Tim Eagle did, I'll start with GPs. I met with GPs in Orkney recently who raised some of the real challenges they face, challenges that have only increased over the years, seemingly with little response from the Scottish Government. The waits to see a GP have grown, as has the paperwork they're having to deal with hours spent on repeat prescriptions or having to meet data requests from patients, all of which has to be delivered by GPs themselves, reducing the time they can spend dealing with actual patients and only increasing the pressures on the system. I know from personal experience the pressure that social care is under. There aren't enough carers, there aren't enough places in suitable accommodation for those who need care. And so our hospitals are full of those who simply do not need to be in hospital. And that situation is only getting worse, not better. Only last year, the Moss Park care home in Fort William was threatened with closure. The residents were prepared for resettlement in new homes with the understandable concerns for them and their families that those new places would not be local, would not be in the communities they grew up in, they wanted to stay in. And with understandable concern within the community itself that with these places lost, staying in Fort William or even Lochaber would be impossible for them in the future. And yes, it does appear that there has been a reprieve for the home, but for how long? For a few years, for slightly longer? That community in Fort William, both those current residents of the home and those who may need it shortly and their families, deserve to know that there will still be care places available locally and in the future. At present, they cannot be confident that is the case. If I've got time.
Briefly, Cabinet Secretary.
He'll, I hope, recognise the fact that, along with the constituency member, Kate Forbes, I met with the residents and family members at Moss Park, and the interventions that were taking place both by Government and Highland Council have seen that home being saved, because I recognise the strength of feeling that there was in that community, and of course will continue to work with Highland Council to see a long-term sustainable approach.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that, but for how long? And I think that's the problem. What will the loss of care provision mean for the Belford Hospital, which itself is in need of replacement? I joined the local community, campaigners and other politicians in Fort William last year to highlight the increasingly desperate need for that much-promised but much-delayed replacement to be finally delivered. And a clear message was sent to the SNP that Lochaber would not accept more delay. And again, there has been more positive news on the Belford recently, but like many in the community, I won't accept that real progress has been made until we see those spades in the ground and work on the build starting. That community has been let down too many times before by SNP ministers in Edinburgh, big on promises, not so big on delivery. Colleagues have spoken about the long journeys faced by young mothers in Caithness and Murray, and the same is faced by many on Skye too. A former paramedic described to me one high-speed drive with blue lights on from Skye to Inverness. It was winter, it was dark, on the roads not suitable for anything other than careful and often slow driving. That is not acceptable, and I'm sure even those on the SNP front benches will recognise that. And it also highlights the pressure the ambulance service is under. I held my own members' debate only a few years ago on the pressures on the ambulance service and their crews, and I know that the service continues to be called on to help and provide cover in areas out with what should be their remit. And that is only exacerbated on Sky when promises to return 24/7 urgent care to Portree Hospital fail time and time again to be delivered. Presiding officer, I'll have to conclude, but I could have spoken, as others have done, about the pressures on mental health provision, the loss of local dentistry, a lack of physio support, important for many older residents, nursing shortages and lack of accommodation. I hope this debate leaves the Health Secretary under no illusions of the severity of the pressures on our rural health services and the desperate need and public demand to reverse the running down, centralisation or loss of services we've had over the SNP's 18 years in power.
Thank you. I now call Rachel Hamilton to be followed by Beatrice Wishart. Up to 4 minutes, Ms Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful to my colleague Tim Eagle for bringing forward tonight's debate on rural healthcare. At 4:05 this afternoon, just over an hour ago, I received this email from a constituent, and I'm going to read it word for word. Dear Rachel, I'm waiting for cataract surgery at the Borders General Hospital. I was told in December it would be possibly a year. Now, I've just had a call from the Borders General Hospital telling me that if I don't accept the Jubilee Hospital as an option, I'll be removed from the waiting list. This I find to be totally unacceptable, as I'm 82. I can't travel to Glasgow. I'm not able. So, as from today, I'm no longer on the waiting list. I just thought I'd let you know this, because I believe it's the SNP government who has made this decision. Listening to First Minister's questions today, I was shocked at what I was hearing about the NHS locally, and replies from John Swinney as if everything is okay. I just can't believe this. I just think this... quickly.
Cabinet Secretary.
If you could write to me with the details of that case, because obviously we're investing in making sure that we can get through the waiting lists and using the national resource that is the Golden Jubilee as well as regional resources on areas of cataract surgery. But I want to see more detail about what has been communicated to the constituent, because that is certainly not the way that we would want or expect patients to be communicated with.
I'm very grateful to Neil Gray for that response, and I certainly will be writing to him, as I have written to him in the last couple of days, inviting him to the Borders to come and thank the hard-working frontline staff, but also to see what more can be done to improve the outcomes, the terrible outcomes that we're seeing in the Borders. Representing Borders covered this last night on ITV Borders, because 58.7% of patients were seen in the 4-hour target. These are the worst on record ever since 2007, and the third worst in Scotland. And Neil Gray knows this. And I just want to put something on the record, that it's not because of the influx of patients from flu. It's because these figures were from November. It's not about that. These were November figures, Cabinet Secretary. Now, I want to cover something in the brief time that I have that is about the financial situation of health boards across Scotland. We had an email earlier saying that Grampian were going into level 3. In my constituency, NHS Borders' financial situation is at a critical state, and the Cabinet Secretary knows this. In just 2 years, their deficit has doubled to 33.6 million. They've been on the level 3 intervention framework since 2021. But what support has this SNP government offered? They've put the board under further strain, in my opinion, by asking them not only to balance the books, but at the same time to make cuts. Ironically, one of the cuts has been outlined is a 10% reduction in the workforce, to a workforce that's already struggling to cope with demand. And in the last 4 years, wait till you hear these figures, NHS Borders has lost 10,000 working days every year to staff absences from mental health. And I have brought that to the Chamber here before. That is unbelievable. Those staff, the staff that are carrying the burden, are running out of goodwill. And that's a direct quote from the Chief Executive, Peter Moore. Presiding Officer, by the time NHS Borders manages to achieve a financial balance, they will still have to pay back outstanding brokerage, which may have reached a staggering 100 million by March 27. I realise we're short of time. There's so much more we can do, and I would like the Cabinet Secretary to come to the Borders to meet with hard-working staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hamilton. I now call Beatrice Wishart to be followed by Alexander Burnett. Up to 4 minutes. Ms Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Tim Eagle for raising this important topic in the Chamber today. In addition to the motion's list of facilities needing replacement, I once again raise the need for a new-build Gilbert Bain Hospital, which serves residents in Shetland. The hospital also serves a wide maritime area because of Shetland's geographic position. The Gilbert Bain Hospital is often the closest available medical facility in the North Sea for fishing vessels, offshore energy sites and passengers from cruise ships. 134 ships carrying over 138,000 passengers visited Shetland last year, and some had to visit the Gilbert Bain Hospital. The Coast Guard Rescue Helicopter regularly flies to Lerwick to land patients airlifted from vessels or oil rigs for treatment at the hospital. It's long past time that the 1950s designed hospital was replaced with a modern, fit-for-purpose facility, and I once again put my call for progress on a new hospital for Shetland on the record. There is much that could be said on the subject for debate this evening, but as time's not on my side, I'll limit my remarks to some of the issues that Shetland patients. Turning to patient travel, first of all, NHS Shetland has arrangements with mainland health boards like NHS Grampian to provide the health care that's not available in Shetland. The impact of communication or miscommunication between different hospital departments can have on island patients was recently raised with me. One of my constituents was required to stay in an Aberdeen hospital a night longer than necessary because they were waiting for a prescription from the hospital pharmacy. Had there been a more pragmatic approach to this, they could have been discharged and a further night in a hospital bed in Aberdeen would have been avoided. The script could have been handed to the patient and they could have taken it to a pharmacy in Aberdeen and been able to fly home that evening. The issue of reimbursement of travel costs is another one that impacts access to health care. For Shetland residents on the island of Bressay, the only way to reach the hospital or health centre in Lerwick is by ferry across a mile of water. Current patient travel rules only allow for patient travel reimbursement when travelling over 5 miles by sea, which raises the question of why 5 miles was set as the arbitrary limit. Either there's a stretch of water that needs to be crossed, or there isn't. This too needs a pragmatic approach, and I welcome NHS Shetland running a 6-month pilot scheme for Bressa residents to be able to claim back a trip to the Lerwick Health Centre. This follows both the Community Council and me raising the financial impact on patients, which can be significant when a frequent and recurring series of appointments are necessary. Underlying all of these issues are the challenges of depopulation that rural and island Scotland face, as highlighted in the motion. The lack of infrastructure, housing and digital connectivity impacts recruitment and retention of NHS staff, and in turn reduced healthcare provision exacerbates depopulation. Technology does allow us to embrace new forms of healthcare, and this can be transformative for healthcare provision, particularly in rural and island areas with small populations. But the lack of reliable digital connectivity makes the credibility of this prospect distant until real action to improve rural and island high-speed broadband is taken. Age Scotland found that 25% of people over 60 in Scotland don't use the internet, another barrier to healthcare through technological means when you consider that 27% of the population in rural areas are aged 65 plus. Addressing healthcare needs in rural and island healthcare includes investment in infrastructure, and I have just about time to let you know that when I visited the Outskerries community last summer, the poor IT connection at the nurse's house was the subject of debate, and I'd been told that when the GP had been in the Isle a few days previously, they were unable to get online. I think I'm out of time. Thank you. Thank you,
Ms Wishart. Before calling the next speaker, as I advised the Chamber, there is a significant interest. That remains the case, and therefore I'm minded to take a motion without notice under Rule 8.14.3 to extend the debate by up to 30 minutes. I invite Tim Eagle to move such a motion. Thank you. Do members agree to extend the debate by up to 30 minutes? That is agreed. I now call Alexander Burnett to be followed by Christine Graham up to 4 minutes. Mr Burnett.
Well, can I start by thanking Tim Eagle for bringing this very important motion to debate? And I also, like my colleagues before me, want to thank our exceptional healthcare workers. With my daughter recently taken into ARI, I know staff are working extremely hard and doing a fantastic job under pressure. But I would like to take this opportunity to raise some of the concerns about our declining health services that I receive every single day as the constituency MSP for Aberdeenshire West. Our local services are at risk of collapse, and our GPs are crying out for help. And the Cabinet Secretary will be aware that I have long campaigned to keep our community hospitals open, particularly Inch War Memorial Hospital, which, despite broken promises by 2 First Ministers, was closed at the start of COVID and remains so. Elsewhere, closures such as the Scolty Ward Dementia Unit at Glenaddie Bankery see services removed, and the MIU in Huntly, with its overnight provision slashed, gives a serious worry that GMED services will also soon face cuts. These local units would relieve pressure on ambulances and the ARI, but the Health Board simply does not have the funds to keep them open. Just today, as mentioned, NHS Grampian has been escalated to stage 3 of the finance framework, which will no doubt lead to further cuts and closures. Like others, we have also seen a reduction in services being provided locally. The SNP government's one-size-fits-all approach simply does not recognise the reality of our rural communities, and this has very real consequences on people's lives. Centralisation has resulted in elderly constituents forced to travel lengthy journeys, often in areas without public transport, for something as routine as a flu jab. Some residents in Arford were even told that they should organise taxis with other patients, a ridiculous suggestion considering they would not know other patients' appointments due to something like GDPR. Again, as others have touched on, ambulance provision affects my whole constituency. In October, a baby was delivered under traumatic circumstances, and the family had to do CPR for half an hour on a newborn baby before an ambulance arrived. And whilst I'm grateful that the Health Secretary has agreed to meet with me, I have little confidence that the SNP will implement any meaningful change after mismanaging our NHS for 18 years. And where communities do find solutions, like the capital cost of a new 4x4 first responder vehicle in Braemar, the Scottish Ambulance Service rejects it, saying they will not cover the maintenance costs. I look forward to the Cabinet Secretary's response on this when we meet, a decade after the Braemar ambulance was stripped from the community. Because for rural communities, the decline of healthcare provision is literally now a matter of life and death. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Christine Graham to be followed by Sharon Dowie. Up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I thank the member for securing this debate. And for obvious reasons, I'll focus on my own constituency, part of the rural borders. Yes, of course, there are pressures in rural areas for the broad range of health services, which by the very nature of the distances and topography and indeed demographics with more elderly differ from urban areas. I know this not only as the constituency MSP, but lived in earlier times in Minnigaff in rural Galloway, when it was 60 miles to go to either Ayr or Dumfries Hospital. However, while there are pressures, as there are across the UK, there are advantages in being rural. Everyone, practically across the professional and voluntary sector, seems to know someone who knows someone else. Housing agencies, GPs, pharmacists, social work, NHS borders. Collaboration, so difficult in urban areas, is personal. And of course, volunteers interact, not only professionally, but socially. And in smaller communities, there's even closer-knit collaboration. Regarding Rachel Hamilton's comment, I have had similar things and have intervened successfully in circumstances for a constituent when an alternative issued to them simply wasn't practical and it was resolved. So that was wrong, what was said. Not by Rachel Hamilton, but the message that her constituent got. On recruitment in recent years, NH Borders has successfully recruited 33 international recruits and another 27, though at that time not yet starting. These are figures are slightly historical, but demonstrate a success. And how did they do it? Well, NHS Borders set in place contacts to local services, schools and so on, for them and their families, key workers' housings and so on, so it was made comfortable for people wanting to come to work professionally in the borders. I turn now to Hospital at Home, which does what it says on the tin. It was launched as a pilot in the Borders in 2023, and on a visit with the Cabinet Secretary of Health recently to the Borders General Hospital, we learned of its success for the well-being and recovery of patients, particularly the elderly. It frees up hospital beds, and indeed NHS Borders benefits from the largest slice of the Scottish Government's funding to continue this development, and been allocated £600,000 from a £3.6 million government pot. Evidence shows that those benefiting from this service are more likely to avoid hospital or care home stays for up to 6 months after an acute illness. It frees up beds. Over 90% who took up the offer had nothing but praise for it. So much better if you can be treated and recover at home in the comfort of familiar surroundings. But I want to turn to the voluntary sector, who are integral to the delivery of health care and well-being across the borders. We've got the Royal Voluntary Service, Scottish Borders Hub. A voluntary driver can take clients to regular NHS appointments in the community, including covering cancer care patient transport appointments, which may even be without the local area, even as far as going to the ERI in Edinburgh. Similarly, there's Borders Wheels, which I visited in Galashiels, and available to the issues for them are examples. They take people to health appointments. They take them travel to respite care. These are issues I think are very difficult to connect in urban areas. Then there's We Are With You, which was formerly known as Adaction, and I've been at that a few times to visit them. It's a Borders drug and alcohol support service. It's free, it's non-judgmental support and advice from what they call now the With You team. Everything, whether in person or online, is confidential. The only time this might change is if they have serious concerns about their client or someone else's safety. They provide support groups, support for family and friends, free syringe service, and are very discreet. And finally, there's Borders Dementia-Friendly Tweeddale, which again is very supportive not just of people who may be diagnosed with dementia, but who need their family support. So I commend all across my constituency in the NHS services and the volunteers for what they do.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I now call Shannon Dowie to be followed by Emma Harper, up to 4 minutes. Ms Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We've heard a number of accounts today how remote and rural communities suffer from a lack of attention from this Scottish Government when it comes to health and other services, and Ayrshire in my region is no different. Doctors at Girvan Community Hospital recently came to the conclusion they were unable to continue the valuable overnight service for patients in the area. They cited, and I quote, sustainability and workforce issues as the reason for the withdrawal. In other words, a lack of money, a lack of resources, a lack of trained GPs coming through the system, and a lack of focus by the Scottish Government on the needs of rural Scotland. It's the first time local medics will not be staffing the facility. Until now, the 20-bed unit has been nimble and quick to respond to patient needs. The fear is now, with doctors coming from further afield to deal with urgent cases, that a quick and reliable response will be placed in jeopardy. Those in charge have maintained that patient care will remain a priority, and some rejigging of the region-wide urgent care service means there will at least be some help at hand. But this downgrade is even more concerning to locals, since availability of ambulances for the rural Carrick area has already been highlighted. Added to their concern are constant road closures and diversions on the main route, the A77, to main hospitals. Although I have been assured that ambulances are given priority access through road closures, anyone travelling themselves to hospitals can be faced with substantial diversions taking hours to travel. But it's not the only example of how rural healthcare in Ayrshire is suffering under the SNP. There is a lack of ambulances for the rural Carrick area. There have been service changes for patients in relation to clinics in Ayr and Kilmarnock. Flagship schemes to attract more GPs to work in areas like those in rural Ayrshire have fallen flat. Being able to register for a dentist is challenging, and no consideration is given to patient transport when local clinics are moved to centralised locations. There are so many unique challenges facing health services in rural Scotland because of the geographical hand they have been dealt. But often the nationwide failings of the health service are felt even more acutely in smaller countryside locations. No one pretends this is an easy fix, but we're now coming on 18 years of SNP power in Scotland, With every year that goes by, their attempts to blame everyone else become less and less credible. And as contributions in this debate have shown, those failings are often felt more painfully the further away from the big cities you live. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Dowie. I now call Emma Harper to be followed by Brian Whittle. Up to 4 minutes, please, Ms Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Tim Eagle for securing this debate. It's really popular for everybody to be able to speak about their own rural areas, and I've written some additional notes as everybody's been speaking as well. At the end of last year, just before recess, our Parliament's Health Committee published our report into remote and rural healthcare in Scotland, and the committee made recommendations regarding education and training, recruitment and retention, how services are currently designed and delivered, as well as primary care and multidisciplinary team working, and the importance of the third sector. So it's good to hear Christine Graham mention that as well. One issue that was prevalent was the lack of housing in remote and rural areas, not only for full-time workers, but also for people who are assigned placement as part of training in more remote and rural areas. And, Presiding Officer, I've raised remote and rural healthcare challenges for 8 years in this place: cancer pathways, maternity services in Wigtonshire, the recruitment and retention of health and social care staff, and addressing delayed discharges and ensuring our social care system is able to cope with increasing high demand. And I've been working with former GPs Dr Gordon Baird and Dr Angela Armstrong to raise rural Wigtonshire healthcare issues in this place as well. And I wanted to briefly touch on some of the challenges. With an older population, you have more hip replacements, more knee replacements, more cataract surgery. I'm an operating room nurse in my previous background, and I was a clinical educator for NHS D&G. And these surgeries are really complex. They're complex in anaesthesia, they're complex in the technique and the skills required. You can only do 3 or 4 hip or knees a day. So I welcome that we have these national treatment centres now that can focus on addressing these issues. So there is some work that is being taken forward. NHS Dumfries and Galloway have successfully recruited nurses from Uganda, and as part of embedding them into their work environment, they did support for the Scots language and Scots phrases so that the Uganda nurses would ken when somebody says, "I've got a sore head," or "my lugs hurt," or something like that. So that's actually something that's really positive. Dumfries and Galloway has experienced a high number of deregistering of persons in dental practices, and I know Minister Jenny Minto is very well aware of this and has been paying attention and has taken loads of questions in Chamber about it as well. And we know people are paying for private treatment now and others have no dentists at all. But I met with a retired dentist constituent just last week, and his particular practice focused on paediatrics and the prevention of dental caries. And he actually welcomed the fact that there's now a toothbrush in the baby box, and that helps prepare babies for feeling how a toothbrush is in their mouth. And that's another good news story as well. And I know the Public Health Minister is working with NHS D&G on dentistry, and my constituent says he suggested 20 years ago that a mobile dental hub model should have been created for rural dental in D&G. So I won't pursue the issues of maternity because I know Mr Carson has done that adequately, and I did invite Mr Carson and Colin Smith to join me at a pre-arranged meeting that I had asked for the Minister, because I wanted it to be a cross-party, apolitical approach, and the Minister met with us last November. So there is engagement happening. One other final area is just about delayed discharges, and I know that the Cabinet Secretary, Neil Gray, is all over this with NHS Dumfries and Galloway as well. There are challenges with rural care packages and there's challenges on delayed discharges, but we know that more than 90% of all hospital discharges happen without delay. And I will stop there, Presiding Officer, and happy to continue in the future.
Thank you very much indeed. I now call Brian Whittle to be followed by Carol Mochan. Up to 4 minutes. Mr. Whittle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I'll start, as others have, with congratulating my colleague Tim Eagle for bringing what is a hugely important matter to this chamber. And we're all aware of the pressures that the Scottish Health Service is under and the incredible work our healthcare professionals are doing in such a difficult environment. And those pressures are magnified when trying to deliver healthcare in rural areas. And there's much we could discuss today, as has already been done, but however I want to focus on the part technology could and should play in the health service, especially as a major solution to rural healthcare delivery. What we need is a health service that effectively delivers healthcare across our country, and a health service that delivers an environment that supports our healthcare professionals. In doing so, we need to recognise that delivering that effective and efficient care will require different approaches and adaptations for rural and urban settings. The development and adoption of technology into health service has lagged way behind the rest of the world in the United Kingdom, and Scotland lags behind the rest of the United Kingdom. The inability to share data across health boards and between primary, secondary healthcare, pharmacy and the third sector seriously hampers the ability to deliver effective and efficient healthcare. The problem we're trying to solve, Deputy Presiding Officer, is one of time. How do we give our healthcare professionals more time to deliver healthcare as opposed to swamping them with administration and red tape? Firstly, we need a Scotland-wide technology platform with a basic architecture that allows for that interoperability between health boards and between facets of healthcare with different and appropriate levels of access. Once that's in place, we have the ability to directly take out duplication that occurs in the back office administration across health boards. We also have the ability to directly share good practice and access patient records. Once that is in place, we can start to look at how we take service to the people rather than insist that people come to the service in all cases, as was raised by Tim Eagle. We have the ability to deliver scans and pharmacy and vaccinations, as was highlighted by Fergus Ewing. We even have the ability to deliver doctor surgeries from mobile units. With a basic communication and collaboration platform, these mobile units can be directed to any hotspots, and a workforce plan for rural communities can be easily established. And again, Tim Eagle highlighted the specific problems of small teams and staff shortages. If we layer AI on top of that, diagnosis from scans can be almost immediate. And while we're on the subject, imagine being able to remotely access consultants from a mobile doctor's surgery. Multi-layered access to healthcare that would currently take months of appointment making, with the patient having to travel from pillar to post, especially relevant for those taking a ferry or driving hundreds of miles for a 15-minute appointment. Deputy Presiding Officer, these options are not fantasy or science fiction. They have been available for years. This is how we deliver access for all to healthcare. This is how we create a rural healthcare system that encourages people to stay in a rural setting. And this is how we reduce the intolerable strain on our health service. As the old saying goes, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Continuing to increase the investment in the healthcare service without a long-term plan, as Audit Scotland said in their report on the SNP health service, is unsustainable. Change the delivery mechanism. Give more time to our healthcare professionals to do what they do best. Otherwise, all the Scottish Government are doing is continuing to manage the decline of healthcare in this country, which is felt ever more acutely in our rural communities. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. I now call Carol Mochan to be followed by Craig Hoy. Up to 4 minutes, please. Ms.
Thank
Mochan.
you, Presiding Officer, and to Tim Eagle for securing this debate. As a South of Scotland MSP, I am no stranger to the harsh realities faced by those accessing health services in rural areas. Like other members, I receive lots of correspondence on this. Living in a remote and rural community should not limit your access to basic and specialist care, but we know that it does. I was going to cover the maternity services, but other members have spoken very well about that. But the point I wanted to make is that we need to understand local patients' wishes on models of local care, particularly when it comes to maternity services, because we all agree that lay-by deliveries are not safe. So the pretence that we're doing something to make something safer doesn't hold true in those circumstances. In terms of time, I'll move on to the other points that I wanted to raise. I briefly wanted to mention the National Centre for Remote and Rural Health Care, and the intentions of it are very, very welcomed. But I would raise that, in my view, I think the initiative is not widely understood by boards, by clinicians and by patients. And if we want that to be maximised, what could come out of that centre, then I think we need to do some work in that. For the rest of my time, I want to cover healthcare workforces. As was mentioned by one of the other members, the Health, Sport and Social Care Committee inquiry into remote and rural healthcare highlighted the critical importance of local availability of suitably trained and development opportunities to support the recruitment and retention of the healthcare workforce across the board, but in particular some of our professional workforces, nurses, allied health professionals, consultants, GPs. And the Government must work with trade unions, professional bodies, training providers and NHS boards to discuss opportunities to improve training flexibility and delivery on that recruitment, and perhaps some of the, of course.
Cabinet Secretary, very briefly on this point, this is the exact focus of what we're trying to achieve with the Nursing and Midwifery Task Force, and I hope she'd recognise that, and the recommendations and findings that are due to be published we will seek to deliver as quickly as possible. Carol Moch.
Thank you. Absolutely, and I do recognise that we've discussed it before in the Chamber, and I absolutely recognise and I suppose some of my frustration is the urgency that we need. We have a lot of the evidence and we do need to move to the delivery of it. I was going to mention that perhaps some of the, in terms of training and delivery of training, some of the initiatives that the member before me, Brian Whittle, mentioned would of course be really helpful in this area. I want to mention in particular apprenticeships and the opportunity to introduce tailored and flexible approach to education and training. And I have mentioned it before in terms of the NHS. I strongly urge the Government to consider those opportunities, or to move those opportunities forward, because I know you have discussed them. I know that professional bodies want to engage in this. They see the benefit for both the patient and for the staff. And I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary does have any update on us, in particular the allied health professionals. I met with the British Dietetic Association, and that professional organisation are really keen to support this. They understand the importance of having people in these remote areas. It would be good quality jobs also for people, and they absolutely see the benefit. But some of the educational stuff needs to come together to make that happen. So in the interest of time, I'm going to leave it there. I do know that the Cabinet Secretary and his team understand this, but it's just about how do we actually get it over the line. And I thank the members for their contributions.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. And I call Craig Hoy to be followed by Tess White, up to 4 minutes. Mr Hoy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome this debate and thank Tim Eagle for bringing it to Parliament. I think the number of participants should clearly send the Minister a message. And I join my colleagues who have shared their testimony and concern about the SNP's ongoing failure to address the crisis facing rural healthcare. I represent the south of Scotland, and from Dunbar to Dumfries, residents have been badly let down. East Lothian has seen vital healthcare facilities withdrawn. In the Scottish Borders, Borders General Hospital is repeatedly asking those only with life-threatening emergencies to attend. And in Dumfries, it's a similar picture, where in December the emergency department at Dumfries Infirmary was operating beyond capacity. Health boards are warning that they are operating in an extremely high degree of pressure, causing patients concern and worry and stress amongst their families. But sadly, Minister, these state of emergency announcements have become the new normal under this SNP government. They stem in large part from the problem of delayed discharge, which stems from the SNP's failure to tackle the crisis in social care and care at home. Now, vital services in my own area of the south of Scotland have been withdrawn as the government pushes a centralised model of care, a model of care that clearly doesn't work in rural areas. For East Lothian residents are sad and angry at the loss of two well-used local facilities, which have closed in the space of a year, and which ministers gave repeated assurances would not be closed without consultation. The Errington Hospital was East Lothian's sole minor injuries clinic and offered local palliative care facilities, and those needing step-down care or palliative care are now sent to Haddington or remain on wards in Edinburgh undischarged, which is clearly not aiding their recovery. And Belhaven Hospital, which offered residential care, was closed later last year to the disgust of Dunbar residents. Now, the way, Minister, that Belhaven Hospital was closed was nothing short of shocking. Vulnerable older people were taken with little or no notice from their beds and moved 12 miles away to a different hospital. The move was unexpected, unwanted and distressing for the residents, and to add insult to injury, some patients were relocated late into the night, with some frail and elderly patients being moved still at 1 a.m. Our rural communities have been truly betrayed, and that is a concrete example of that. Now, I carried out surveys about the Errington and Belhaven hospitals, and more than 500 people responded, and their views were stark. Some residents could no longer visit dying family members due to travel and logistical issues, or simply the financial pressures of getting to and from Edinburgh. Some elderly patients were taken away from places where they said the nurses felt like more than family members in their dying days. And Deputy Presiding Officer, the Health and Social Care and Sport Committee of this Parliament recently issued a report into remote and rural healthcare. It highlighted some significant problems that people in rural areas face when seeking to access NHS services. And too often the Scottish Government forgets about rural residents who face very specific challenges, including the need, as I said, to travel long distances to access services. Imagine, Minister, how long it might take someone who has an injury or a wound to get from Oldhamstocks to the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. And the problems that are faced by Scotland's rural communities in relation to healthcare are not new, but it is clear that they're getting worse. And how can this government claim to be supporting rural communities when nearly half of all NHS vacancies in Scotland are for rural NHS boards? And whether it relates to the model of care, the provision of social care or the NHS workforce, this government is failing to deliver what our communities clearly need.
Thank you. I now call Tess White to be followed by Douglas Lumsden, again up to 4 minutes. Ms White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also congratulate my colleague Tim Eagle for securing this important debate. Rural GP practices are struggling and too many are on the verge of collapse. Freecombe Health Centre in Angus, which was Tayside's highest ranked practice, was forced to close in 2022. In NHS Grampian, 6 practices have handed their contracts back to the Health Board. In large part, Presiding Officer, because of the SNP's complete lack of workforce planning. Patient safety is at stake, which we've heard today. So is the sustainability of primary care in rural communities. Alarm bells should be ringing in Butte House. But we keep hearing the same recycled platitudes from successive SNP health secretaries and nothing to show for it. Presiding Officer, there are enduring problems in several areas. 1. The 2018 contract still hasn't been implemented, and it's been a disaster, an absolute disaster for rural GP practices. 2. Having a one-size-fits-all approach has become a serious human rights issue in rural communities. 3. In addition, the NRAC formula is supposed to ensure resources for the NHS are distributed fairly across the country, but figures show that NHS Grampian has been shortchanged by £250 million. That's £250 million since the SNP got into power. Astonishingly, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde received £743 million more than it was due. The SNP must properly invest in healthcare in rural and remote areas, which includes rural proofing and budgeting. And I sit on the Equalities Committee, and I'd like to say to the Cabinet Secretary, rural proofing in budgeting is not happening. Rural communities are losing out on a postcode lottery for healthcare, and that mustn't be allowed to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms White. I now call final speaker in the open debate, Douglas Lumsden, around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Those of us that represent rural communities are all too aware of the challenges residents in those communities face in accessing healthcare. In all corners of the north east of Scotland, those challenges can be found. And Tim Eagle's motion before us today highlights how many of Scotland's rural communities are currently facing a reduction of services. This is exactly what we're seeing in Aberdeenshire, with a significant reduction in minor injury services in Fraserburgh, Peterhead, Huntly and Turriff. And this is doing nothing to help local residents and only increasing the pressure on staff and resources in larger hospitals like Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, who recently declared a major incident and were actually turning people away. What an absolute shambles created by this devolved SNP government. And to make things worse, rural patients are often confused when local hospitals are open and what services they offer. Turriff Hospital, for example, used to have a minor injuries unit, but this was scaled back during COVID, but has never been fully restored. And looking at the NHS Grampian website, I'm no clearer what services it now offers. And I also want to raise the issue of ambulance waiting times. And I'm sure that members who represent Scotland's rural regions will have heard awful stories from constituents who have faced agonising waits for an ambulance. I certainly have. Last year, patients waiting for an ambulance in Turriff faced a wait nearly 3 times longer than other North East patients. And this has come down thanks to a new ambulance, one that was delivered thanks to the hard work and campaigning from former MP David Duckett. David ran an excellent campaign to have an ambulance based in Turriff, and this means so much to the local residents, and I commend him for all his work he did on this. Simple geography will, of course, be a challenge with communities spread far over wide areas. But this devolved SNP government needs to do more to reduce rural inequalities and halt the problem of rural depopulation. Thank you, President Officer.
Thank you very much. Mr Lumsden, can I thank all colleagues for their cooperation and allowing me to call everybody that wanted to speak and allowing them at least 4 minutes to speak. And with that, I call Neil Gray to conclude the debate. Around 7 minutes, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank, first of all, Tim Eagle for raising these matters and all the members across the Chamber for their contributions to this important debate today. Tim Eagle opened his contribution by referencing the fact that rural depopulation was the first debate that he brought to this chamber. It's also the first interaction that I had with a political chamber as a teenager in Orkney at Orkney Islands Council, where we discussed island depopulation at that time. So for him, his first debate here, for me, my first interaction in a political chamber, we both share a sense of responsibility to ensure that we have sustainable rural and island communities. It's something that I care deeply and passionately about, as I know my ministerial team do, who both represent rural and island communities. There are opportunities for us to work together across a number of areas to better meet the unique place-specific needs of our rural and island communities. And in closing, I want to set out our plans to deliver long-term sustainable and quality services to improve outcomes across these communities. And I will also do my best to address as many of the points that have been raised across the Chamber as I can. The motion calls for proper investment. As members will be aware, the Government's 25-26 draft budget includes a £21.7 billion investment in reformed health and social care, an uplift exceeding consequentials and taking funding to an all-time high. Recognising the need for capital investment to support rural health services, the budget provides £139 million additional investment for health infrastructure, including restarting the work on the Belford Replacement Hospital, as Jamie Halker-Johnson referenced. I will do briefly to Finlay Carson.
Briefly, Finlay Carson.
I very much appreciate the Cabinet Secretary giving way, and I've got no doubt he understands issues of rural Scotland. But would you commit to reviewing the NRAC formula as a matter of urgency, as you committed to do in a previous session in the Chamber here last year, because it's with no doubt leading to maternity services closing and cottage hospitals closing right across the likes of Dumfries and Galloway.
Always through the Chair and Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the NRAC formula accounts for the additional cost of delivering services in rural areas, and all boards are within less than 1%, which is where of the NRAC parity, which is where I don't recognise Tess White's figures, and would need to go back and study her assessment of that more closely. But of course, the NRAC formula continues to be under review, and we make sure that we do our best to ensure that all boards receive a fair settlement. We're continuing to shift the balance of care to be more preventative and community-based by increasing general practice capacity, a focus of Mr Eagle's speech, and access improvements by the end of 2026, and increase the funding to general medical services by £73 million this year to over £1.3 billion. The role of the primary care team is vital in rural and island areas, where their wide-ranging expertise takes on added significance, as Christine Graham referenced in her remarks tonight, and you, Presiding Officer, referenced in response to the committee debate at the end of last year. In November, I announced an additional £13.6 million of recurring funding to support general practice to recruit and retain staff. We have also published our plan, which sets out a suite of 20 actions the Scottish Government will take to improve GP recruitment and retention, including in rural and island areas, an issue that I know a number of colleagues raised in their contributions. This includes the provision of the Rural Fellowship, offering GPs the opportunity to develop the required skills through direct experience of working in rural general practice. We'll also be looking at the Golden Hello scheme to ensure we're providing the right incentives for GPs to take up harder-to-fill posts in rural settings. Again, a point that Mr Eagle asked me to consider. We already are. We have commissioned NHS Education for Scotland to work with the profession to redesign the current GP retention scheme to make it more flexible to support GPs at times in their career where that is needed. And to further support GPs, we have significantly expanded the primary care multidisciplinary workforce, with over 4,900 staff working in services funded through the primary care phased investment programme. I understand the calls from some GP practices, not all, for those roles to be directly employed by their GPs. That's something by their practices. That is something that we continue to consider. And through the programme, recognising that barriers to implementation can be exacerbated in rural and island settings, we're partnering with a number of areas, including the Borders and Shetland, to demonstrate what a fully functional, effective, multidisciplinary team model looks like in practice. Looking to the future, the primary care route map will set out how the system operates across rural areas and fits with wider reforms. We've invested in the National Centre for Remote and Rural Healthcare, hosted within Education for Scotland, to bring a coordinated approach. And this includes working to improve recruitment and retention, grow skills, access to training and develop new models of service delivery, all focused on improved outcomes for rural and island communities. Furthermore, we'll, in partnership with Education for Scotland's National Centre and Centre for Workforce Supply, deliver a sustained model of direct support that will provide rural island employers across health and social care with the whole system approach that is necessary to improve recruitment and retention. As I set out in December's debate, we've very briefly. I can give you additional time. Brian Whittle.
I really appreciate the Cabinet Secretary taking time. I wonder if we would consider, currently we're told we're 1,000 GPs short. Would you not consider that by adopting the technology I was talking about, you may find that you're not quite 1,000 GPs short, and actually we could be more effective in the way we deliver healthcare that way?
Again, through the Chair, and I give you the time back.
Thank you, President Officer. Embracing innovation and technology is a central theme of what I'm seeking to take forward in terms of reform and improvement, exactly to the point that Mr Whittle puts to me, which is around ensuring that we are freeing clinical capacity, freeing the time that our staff have to deliver only the aspects that can be delivered by humans, that caring, loving, compassionate approach that we need. Some of those innovations are already in development. The NHS Near Me, the work around hospital at home, are all areas around where technology has been utilised in order to provide exactly that, and I'd be happy to engage further with Mr Whittle on how we could go further. We are, as part of that group, seeking to define what the core services that should be delivered in our communities, balancing these with the need for specialised care, which may be provided outside the local area where clinically appropriate to ensure the best outcomes for patients. Something that has been at the heart of everybody's speeches has been that conundrum of where we need to make sure we deliver services as close to people's homes homes as possible, whilst also making sure that those services meet a patient safety test. And I know that's something that colleagues are all well aware of. I want to touch on some contributions briefly. Colleagues referenced maternity services, and I'm more than happy to come back to that, as will Minister for Public Health Jenny Minto, because there is ongoing work in Dumfries and Galloway, in Caithness and a range of other areas on making sure that we are meeting the needs of patients. To Mr Ross's point around the Burkhead and Hopeman practice, again, Ms Minto is engaging, continues to engage with the Health and Social Care Partnership on this point, and there's a further meeting due later this month on this very point. To conclude, Presiding Officer, I'm sorry that I couldn't get to everybody's contributions today, because they have been extensive. They have been based upon real-life experience of constituents, of your own experiences of the health and social care services within our communities. But I want to give an assurance that this government continues to take the needs of rural and island communities seriously. I've set out the areas that we're seeking to invest in that I hope colleagues can get in behind. The colleagues will know that our door, all of the ministerial team's doors, are open to discuss any ideas or issues that are prevalent within their communities, and we will continue to work to make sure that we improve public services within rural and island communities. I'm committed to driving that reform that we need to secure sustainable services now and in the future across our communities, whether that's in rural, island or urban, and improving the outcome for our population nationwide. Thank you.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Concludes the debate. Again, I thank members for their cooperation in allowing so many members to participate in the debate. And with that, I close this meeting of Parliament.